three panels in the studio today. And before we start, I just want to remind you of a few things. We're very glad to have you back for the second day. It's a little hotter, so we're going to encourage everyone to go outside during the break so that we can get some air circulation in here. Please remember to hold your applause, because we're still doing a two-studio situation for the next three panels. So hold your applause not until the end of all the presentations, but until after the Q&A. Because your presentations might end a little earlier than the presentations in the next room, and it'll be happy to hear you applaud these days, but it'll probably mess with your sound. So hold your applause until the very, very end of the panel, until after the Q&A. And if you want to show your appreciation to the panelists, you can always do a twinkling thing, or whatever, however else you want to show it. The second thing we want to remind you about is the restrooms. There are two restrooms in this facility. One is right there, and the other one's in the basement. We also have overflow restrooms, which have been graciously provided to us by the new museum, which is right across the street. It's a giant building with a ship on the front. So if you are typically able, and if you're not presenting and you have time to do a 2-minute walk across the street, go to that restroom, please do so. And I also remind you about the trash. We have clear bags for recycling and black bags into which the trash that's not recycled goes into. So look for those out in the lobby. And if you can, please don't leave any trash under your chairs or on the floor, because the only people who will be picking that up is you guys and the web people. So we thank you for picking up after yourself, and we hope you enjoyed today. And I'm passing this on back to Dorothy, who's the presider for our next panel today, introduce the panelists.
Hello, everyone. Everything. I mean, I'm on a mic, but in here, all right. Okay, great. So I'm honored to introduce the panelists for Here Comes Everybody. So first up is Apryl Williams, and she's a doctoral student and diversity fellow in the Department of Sociology at Texas A&M University.
No, you're fine. I'm not saying I need to hold back while I talk.
Her research investigates race-based patterns in social media used among American millennials. Williams' other research interests include postmodernism, identity, fat studies, and social theory. Apryl Williams. Next will be Legacy Russell. She's a writer, artist, and curator. She is the London Gallery Relations representative for the online platform Artsy. Holding a Master's of Visual Culture with distinction at Goldsmith College and University of London. Her academic and creative work focuses on gender performance, digital selfdom, idolatry, and new media ritual. Legacy Russell. After Legacy will be Mariam Naziripour. She's a writer and aspiring game designer interested in the relationship between femininity, reality TV, and capitalism. So it's Mariam. And finally, we'll have Emily Bick. She's a master's student in human-centered systems at City University London and a journalist writing on technology, music, and culture. First up will be Apryl. And last thing, if you have questions, please use the hashtag B5.
Okay, so, yes, is it close?
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Okay, yes, I'm Apryl Williams from Texas A&M University, and I'm going to be talking about fat people of color and online spaces and what that looks like, what that means. So, let's see. First, what is fat activism and fat positivity? So fat and fatness challenge the unrealistic expectations that are presented by and in mainstream culture. Though the movement has been slow in gaining momentum, sort of now I'm seeing it all over the place, especially in New York, but back where I'm from in Texas, that's not the case. Like we were on the subway and I saw the I think it's Elaine Bryant, I'm No Angel campaign. And we were just talking about that in one of my classes, so I thought that was really interesting. But the movement, if you want to call it that, because it's arguable, is fractured. And there's disagreement about the idea of fat and the word fat and how we use that. So let's talk about this word. There are two different main camps in the idea of, there's either the body positive folks or the fat activism. And body positive is more of healthy at every size, those types of narratives where they still have the morality claims, whereas fat activism argues that we should divorce the morality from the idea of being fat or obese. So the idea is that you can be fat and be fine, and no one should judge you, basically. That's the idea behind fat activism. So, sorry. Where am I? Okay, so even within the dominant narrative, though, in fat-accepting spaces, this idea of hegemonic, the overarching beauty norms can still be overpowering. So when you think about whiteness, and we cross those things with class as well, there's still sort of women of color are subjugated within the overarching framework. So, let's see. Bodies are stigmatized and presented as passive recipients of the male gaze often. And in some fat-accepting spaces, so like nightclubs where fat is supposed to be celebrated, men will actually come to the nightclubs and will dance with the women and sort of prey on them, and then they will refuse to date them or acknowledge that they're attracted to fat women in open public spaces. And some men will engage in the dominant act of feeding, which is the idea of encouraging a woman to gain weight. It's a sexual relationship, and so he feeds her all of her meals. She'll get all of her nutrients from him, basically. And so this is him enforcing his complete power over her. And these are things that we don't really talk about in the mainstream sort of fat activism movement. Especially not on television or mainstream discourse, but when you think about it online, these are some of sort of the things that we talk about. So, because of the idea that fat women have been symbolically annihilated from the media, and what I mean by that is fat women often don't have roles on TV, or if they are, they're very tropey. So the movie with the singing that I can't remember right now, Fat Amy. So she's like the common trope of bigger woman is funny but can't play the same roles that straight-sized women would play. And same thing with when you think about race, and that idea is black women of size are usually fulfilling that mammy trope. So they're bigger, darker-skinned women. They're not allowed to play the lead acting role, or they're completely symbolically annihilated from the media altogether. So they just don't have a space in the television shows that we watch unless they're fitting into those specific ideas. So because of that, the Fatosphere has developed online, and it's a loosely interconnected network of online resources aimed at creating a safe space where individuals can counter fat prejudice, resist misconceptions of fat, engage in communal experiences, and promote positive understandings of fat. So what I did was I wanted to look at the Fatosphere, and these are two main blogs from the Fatosphere. This Is Thin Privilege is more of an academic space, and it's largely it doesn't say it's explicitly for white people, but people of color and an intersectional approach are missing from this website. I think it's great, but I just use it as a sort of comparison against the fat people of color space, which, as you can see, fat people of color is specifically for people of color. And so in case you couldn't see what it was saying on the side there, on This Is Thin Privilege, this blog showcases examples of thin privilege in order to illustrate fat phobia and fat discrimination. And on Fat People of Color, this is the blog dedicated to encouraging and showcasing media of fat and non-straight-sized people of color. We are anti-racist, anti-ableist, anti-classist, anti-queer hatred, anti-transphobic, and generally an all-inclusive space. Okay. Oh, this. Okay. So the whole idea is that it's a space for fat people of color, and in using the word fat, they are reclaiming that word. It's the whole idea of saying, yes, we don't believe in the morality claims that are attached to fat, so we're not going to stigmatize the word. We're going to use it, and we're going to accept it, and we're going to apply it to ourselves. So people of color get to have spaces. We get to have our fashion shows. We get to not need to cater to whiteness all the time. And so whereas this is then privilege is a space for all, they sort of have this all-encompassing, come here and we can have this discourse. Fat people of color explores the differences in ideal body construction based sort of on class, on sexual identities. This is a really cool space, I think, because everybody can come and sort of support each other while addressing the differences that exist within the movement. So I didn't want to put up pictures of actual people because I'm just not comfortable with that. I don't know that they would want their pictures posted at a conference. But that's what this site is about. So people send in their pictures to the website and they describe their bodies in the way that they want them to be perceived. But this is an example of artwork that people have submitted there. And I wanted to show it's really cool because it is all encompassing. And it's not just for fat women of color, but fat men or anybody along the gender spectrum. Any way anyone identifies, you are free to be yourself and express that in this space. So in comparing the two, I did a comparative analysis, comparative textual analysis, mainly looking at fat people of color, but comparing it to this is thin privilege. And so fat people of color does use a body positive narrative, whereas this is thin privilege uses a fat positive narrative. So they are more aggressively claiming to divorce the word fat from that stigmatization and the morality claims. Fat people of color uses a more introspective communal support language to encourage the community, and it actively resists the fetishizing of the fat body with disclaimers on images posted by the people who are posting the pictures of themselves. And they invoke an intersectionality approach very explicitly on their webpage, and I have some examples of that in a second. Whereas, like I said, this is thin privilege, excuse me, has a more academic tone, and people of color are noticeably absent from the discourse. So this is one of the captions from a picture that someone posted. And so these pictures are a giant fuck you to everyone who has ever tried to make me feel bad about my body. It's a fuck you to all the people who wanted to like me in private because they couldn't handle my body. It's a fuck you to everyone who has ever offered me dieting or exercise tips that I never asked for. And most of all, it's a fuck you to everyone who fetishizes the fat body. And you'll see often they have this, don't reblog this to your fetish or porn blogs, sort of because they know that this happens. And like this person is saying, you don't get to consume my body in private and not acknowledge that. And so this is sort of an example of the intersectionality that they invoke. And so gonna attempt to start this hashtag for those who realize that body positivity is much more than how fat or how thin your body is. It's about race, it's about gender expression, it's about disabilities and consent and autonomy. It's about socioeconomic status and sexuality and so much more. All of this and more needs to be included in the body pos movement. If you agree, please use this hashtag. I'd love to see it take off. Let's see. So one of the things that I really wanted to talk about was the idea that women of color have different ideal body types. And that's one of the things that fat people of color really talks about on their website. So lots of research has looked at the idea that Black women in particular have different standards of ideal beauty than do white and Latina women. And of course that intersects with class. So they found that women with a higher socioeconomic status and white and Latina women generally have a more thin, closer to the standard mainstream ideal beauty type, whereas Black women have a standard that's a little bit bigger than the average body type. And there are several studies with the actual numbers. If you guys wanted to look them up, I could give them to you after. But it's really interesting. And they also talk about the idea that Black women's bodies, just like every person's body, but in particular in the Black community, the weight is carried differently often, and that often gets ignored by doctors and health practitioners, and that further goes to substantiate the morality claim. So they can say, well, you need to lose weight because you're not healthy, or you're lazy, or you're a slob, all of these things that we typically think about when we hear the word fat, when in actuality, if your body just naturally tends to collect fat in certain areas, like everyone's does, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are not engaging your body. But even if you weren't, the whole point is it's your life and your body, and if you want to not engage in self-entrepreneurship and working out all the time, the fat positive movement argues that you should be able to do that. You should be able to occupy a fat body because it's yours to do with what you please, and no one else should be able to police it. So race and class are still privileged in the fatosphere, and though it claims to support and encourage women of all backgrounds, and it is mostly women, which is another idea of the fat people of color, is that it's not just for women. And within that, sort of when we think about mainstream feminism and lots of the ideas that we've had in the past, lots of critiques of feminism were that feminism was for white women and didn't always account for the ideas and the things needed from Black and Latina women. And so women of color are still consigned to seeking solace within themselves instead of being able to reach out to the larger community of fat activists. And the post that I showed you guys a few slides ago when she was talking about we get to have our spaces, that was in response to critique that they had gotten because it was called Fat People of Color. So white people were upset that they weren't all-inclusive, which as a white person, if you want to post there, you can. But this is saying every other space is for white, fat people. So this is for us. And this is where we come to celebrate the things that we need and the differences in our body types. And also talking about class and diversity. All these things are always present on the website. And they have a very interactive sort of support-based network. It feels more personable and close, I guess you could say, than does the other one. And then on a final note, I also wanted to add, one of the interesting, I guess, complexities of the whole movement is that women often have to fight within themselves the idea of wanting to lose weight to be healthy if they feel that that's something that they want to take on while also being a fat activist. So a lot of times in all of the spaces that I looked at in the fatosphere, there's this idea of I want to be healthy, but I don't want to lose too much weight because I don't want to conform to normative ideal beauty standards. And the idea of being fat is that you're taking up space. So in that sense, it's a very active resistance to the male patriarchal idea that you're supposed to be small and take up less space and to constrain ourselves. And so that's just an ongoing, I guess, contention. And I feel that in my personal life as well. So thank you.
Yeah, maybe it's that one. Cool. Okay. Hi, my name is Legacy Russell.
and I'll be here talking about glitch feminism today. So, glitch feminism identifies how digital space acts as a vehicle for exploring, challenging, and radicalizing our understanding of self and the body. Mobilizing the metaphor of the digital glitch as an interrogative agent of gender identity and representation, a vehicle for performance politic within the digital arena, glitch feminism asks, in what way can manipulations or experimentation of sex and gender within the digital arena, creative, deliberate hacks of such systems of virtuality, act as an interrogative agent within the discourse of feminism and gender representation? And further, how can such user behavior on these platforms as performed by gendered bodies be specifically identified as part of a contemporary feminist narrative, unique to this moment in history? This work theorizes glitch feminism via the practice of individuals who specifically make use of digital platforms as a deliberate mode of performativity and experimentation. Self-identified artists who use digital space as a means of pushing boundaries as they perform their own identities. A sampling of such artists ranges from queer rapper Mickey Blanco to transgender artist Boychild or Juliana Huxtable to new media and net artists Amalia Ullman, Anne Hirsch, A.K. Burns, Hannah Black, Tabitha Razar, Fanny Sosa, Georgie Grace, May Waver, and more. Amalia Ullman's Instagram performance, Excellences and Perfections in 2014 brought to the surface serious questions of how images of beauty are used against women and how social media can manipulate our attitudes towards the female body, yet simultaneously surface problematics in her use of the same media and body representation that the performance aimed to critique, begging the question, how to resist a medium using that same medium? Anne Hirsch's Playground in 2013 highlighted the importance of online relationships and digital persona as a means of self-exploration and as intimate rites of passage to the construction of one's sexual selfhood. A.K. Burns' Touch Parade in 2012 borrowed from the online language of fetish to remake fetish videos in which she steps on everyday household objects, vegetables, fruit, etc., exploring the relationship between desire and the online community such desire manifests. Each of these projects elaborates on how the internet is being used as a feminist medium within contemporary art practice and highlights the unique role artists play in expressing anxiety about the construction of self and voicing dissent via their insertion of new bodies and new visual narratives. Glitch feminism aligns itself ideologically with theorist Nathan Jurgensen's critique of digital dualism, coined in 2011 to identify and problematize the splitting of online selfdom from real life. Thus, the more contemporary term AFK, away from keyboard in lieu of IRL, signifies a more continuous progression of the self, one that does not end when a user steps away from the computer, but rather moves out into society. The glitch builds on this theory by specifically targeting the role of performance within this loop, exploring not how digital space and experimentation online divides us from our daily selves, but rather how it helps us understand who we are with greater complexity. Art critic Jean McHugh, in his essay, The Context of the Digital, notes, quote, for many people who came of age as individuals and sexual beings online, the internet is not an esoteric corner of culture where people come to escape reality and play make-believe. It is reality. Thus, the term digital native as applied to generations who remember nothing other than a life bound up within the internet. McHugh notes artist Anne Hirsch's two-person play, Playground, as an example of negotiations of play, reality, and sexuality. The performance explores Hirsch's relationship as a preteen digital native with an older man during a period of time where, quote, the offline world around her wasn't providing sufficient opportunities for emotional and intellectual development, unquote, and therefore, quote, what she felt and learned about the world, her body, and sharing time with another individual through this online relationship was, if nothing else, very real, complicated, and to a great degree enriching. The glitch is the bridge that passes between AFK and IRL. It is all at once a reality and a metaphor. Online, it is the rainbowed spinning wheel, the pixelated hiccup, the frozen screen, or the buffering signal that acts as a fissure, making users cognizant of the separation of self from machine. Yet it is also the glitch that prompts the user to search for an alternative, to make choices, to physically act, to self-actualize, an acknowledgement that when the mediation of digital space fails, users continue by taking action and empowerment offline but never out of body, thereby demonstrating the fallacy of the digital dualist dialectic. The construct of IRL allows for phallogocentrism and neutralizing heteronormativity, assuming that feminist constructions of online identities, performative expression and action are latent, closeted, and fantasy-oriented, rather than explicit, empowered, and illustrative of that which is already real and actively living on offline. So embracing AFK as an explicitly feminist concept is in itself a glitch. It works simultaneously to dismantle the fetishization of real life and give way to the digital self within the realm of the real that previously has been ignored or disregarded. In a recent conversation with Argentinian-Brazilian artist, body-positive activist, educator, and twerk shop facilitator Fanny Sosa, she addressed online space with me as an opportunity to, quote, escape the binary of failure versus success. A binary that embraces bodies that fall within normative categories, but is disrupted by configurations of identity that do not fall exclusively to one side of the divide as a glitch. It is this escape of the binary that is itself an act of resistance, a use of the glitch to cut through and away the glossed, flawless, sterilized, and highly gendered representations of the body within popular media. Complex and committed narratives of self that depart from and challenge prepackaged physicality can act as erratum, providing a myriad of corrections that work against the patriarchy of the gaze. Such cracks in the glossy narrative present us with fantastic failures, new formations of the body, and exciting performances of gender that, in being visible, bring the margins and the marginalized into the mainstream. In Sosa's words, resistance is actually in the cracks. Sosa's own engagement with twerking finds its home online via videos of her performing the dance and the artist's ongoing performative dialogue about gender, race, and the body on Twitter and Facebook, but also manifests itself offline via public twerk shops. Sosa's twerk shops are workshops organized by the artist with the public with a specific purpose of encouraging participants to reconnect with the functionality of and spiritual love for their bodies via the historical and cultural medium of twerking. The artist makes use of the popular dance phenomenon as an opportunity to explore the physicality of the body, push limits therein, discuss the her stories of those engaged in the workshops, and celebrate the female body as an empowered sexual, social, and political agent, vivified via collective practice and communal dialogue, intimate cross-conversation, and, ultimately, exploration of one's body in each workshop in the company of other women as a mode of resistance against the patriarchy of the gaze within the public realm. The word glitch is often delegated to the realm of slang and rife with negative connotations. Often understood as an error in a structured system, Merriam-Webster defines it as a defect or malfunction in a machine or a plan. In a society that conditions the public to find discomfort or outright fear in the errors and malfunctions of our sociocultural mechanics, mechanics that place a higher value on reproductive members of a capitalist society that fall neatly on one side or the other of a binary structure, a glitch becomes a really important and apt metonym. Glitch feminism embraces the causality of error, acknowledging that an error in a social system that has already been disturbed by the violence of economic, racial, social, sexual, and cultural stratification, and the heavy hand of globalization may not in fact be an error at all, but rather a much-needed correction. The word glitch is conjectured to have etymological roots in the Yiddish glitch, slippery area, or perhaps German glitchen, which means to slip or to slide. It is this slip and sliding that makes the glitch plausible, a swim in the liminal, a transformation across selfdoms that links digital identities to the everyday physical self as it conducts itself within the public arena, away from the keyboard. Queer rapper Mickey Blanco, trans performance artist Boy Child, and self-defined cyborg and trans artist Juliana Huxtable present themselves outside of restrictive, heteronormative gender binaries within the public realm, illustrating the awesome opportunity to self-define and self-actualize one's gender identity, to perform and imagine it online, and in turn to realize those new versions of selves offline. Mickey Blanco toys with her gender representation and makes use of her lyrics to discuss queer politic, undermine binaries, and confront expectations. Quote, maybe she born with it, maybe it was Maybelline, unquote, Blanco raps in her 2012 hit song Wavy, later continuing, I pimp slap you with my limp wrist, bro. What the fuck I gotta prove to a room full of dudes who ain't listening to my words because they staring at my shoes? Like Sosa, Blanco makes use of Twitter and Facebook specifically as performative platforms, with followers and friends on either side having access to Blanco's meditations on the body, intimacy, homophobia, and the queering of the artist's representation. Trans performance artist Boy Child exemplifies what writer James Bridle coined in 2012 as the new aesthetic in the blending of the virtual and the physical. Boy Child's presentation showcases the artist's body performing robotically, often nude in trademark lip-sync drag performances, a glowing light emanating from between the artist's lips, a physicality that is electrified by the histories of cybernetics and, as such, surfaces questions about body as machine and how sexualities can be negotiated and expressed therein. At this year's New Museum Triennial, Juliana Huxtable's naked body is on display in artist Frank Benson's new 3D scanned plastic sculpture titled Juliana. Antoine Sargent writes for Vice, quote, Benson's statue made in her likeness, is a post-internet response to the Louvre's classical Grecian sculpture Sleeping Hermaphroditus. Like that ancient artwork, Huxtable's naked pose reveals body parts of both sexes. However, Juliana updates her abashed hermaphroditus with a futuristic metallic sheen, a mudra hand sign, and a bold gaze that challenges the viewer on ideas of femininity and representation. Huxtable's visibility comes at a prime time historically. The visibility of such bodies within the cultural mainstream is still at a low, and so what Huxtable manifests is actually a new direction, a blooming intersectionality. In the digital world, feminists have found a platform that allows them to explore new publics, engage in critical discourse with new audiences, and above all, slip between new conceptions of bodies and selves. So what is the role digital space plays in mobilizing and sliding between various identifications? As German artist and cyberfeminist Cornelia Solfrank observes, cyberfeminism does not express itself in single individual approaches, but in the differences in spaces in between. Philosopher and countersexual Paul B. Presider calls this a process of virtual transformation, noticing that the widening of the scope of sexuality means leaving the body and turning towards an immaterial, informative, if not actually a digital space. Preciado queries, the question we can ask ourselves is if this technical transformation of sexuality will be useful for the old genre, masculine-feminine, and sexuality, hetero-homo reaffirmation, or if it will actually give rise to new political configurations that will escape from the norm. This work is informed by and builds upon the histories and scholarship of cyberfeminism, femininities, and online communication, nodding to the contribution of Donna Haraway's foundational Cyborg Manifesto in the 1980s as the nascent beginnings of what became known in the 1990s as cyberfeminist theory, and acknowledging that cyberfeminist practices historically involve experimentation and engagement with various internet technologies by self-identified women. Glitch feminism maps out the role new media art and digital forms of online communication play in glitching gender constructs. The glitch embraces digital space as a hopeful arena wherein the physical body can perhaps be freed from the mores and regulation of an AFK society that polices, alters, medicates, and murders bodies that resist singularity and assignment, an ongoing tug-of-war between mainstream understandings of sex and gender and how those constructs are applied to the body, the very thing that feminist body politic exists for and answers to. Glitch feminism also scrutinizes what Lisa Nakamura coins as identity tourism, the process by which members of one group try on for size the descriptors generally applied to persons of another group as a current limitation within the contemporary understanding and scholarship in online communication as it relates to identity performance and construction. The idea of internet identity as touristic plays into the normative idea of digital dualism. Viewing these acts of experimentation as pathways towards a blooming of individuated selfhood, though perhaps begun initially under somewhat faceless anonymity of online platforms, can break out to enable a continuous public identity with radical potential. I think here of CL, a feminist and artist of color who produces zines as a part of her creative practice, who in recent conversation shared with me that online platforms like LiveJournal and years later, the more contemporary Twitter, encouraged her to test the grounds and prove herself to herself within a public arena by toying with language, humor, and representation, and seeing how such things were received by others in the public. At first, she saw the opportunity to hide race for a while and just be on these platforms. The facelessness of digital space provided for a neutrality that boosted her confidence as she began to see that her fierce wit, feminist politic, and perspectives on the world were welcomed by an online public. CL notes that it was via the internet that she embraced the performativity of, quote, an intelligent black girl first, a perception of herself that bloomed first online and then taken AFK with greater purpose and understanding. Thus, the current engagement of bodies with the internet is particularly exciting in that such engagements further the discourse around femininities and enable individuals to transform their embodied selves rather than promulgate the myth of a desire to escape embodiment entirely. In a recent conversation with Huxtable, Petra Collins and Huxtable discussed that, quote, the internet and specifically social media became an essential way for Huxtable to explore inclinations that otherwise she would not have had an outlet for. For this artist, as with many others using online space as a site to represent and reperform their gender identities, the internet presents both a tool for global feminist organizing, an opportunity to be protagonist in one's own revolution, and a safe space, a way not to just survive, but also resist repressive sex and gender regimes and the antagonistic normativity of the mainstream. So in conclusion, glitch is a term within technocultures that often is used pejoratively. The reclamation of queer is to the material body politic as glitch is to digital corporality. The two are, to use a term coined by theorist Lauren Berland, inherently juxtapolitical, each nodding in the direction of the other. Thus, Glitch offers up a queering of the constructions of the body within digital space and celebrates experimental user interface in the vein of gender and sexuality. Just as it's taken centuries to shape the structures that support the binaries that largely limit gender within society to male or female, contemporary culture is at the genesis of that journey within digital practice, signifying the opportunity to resist repeating history or falling victim to plugging in the same archaic modes of heteronormativity that have come to dominate world systems beyond our screens. Glitch feminism builds on those queer, feminist, and technological histories, transforming the pejorative glitch, what Presider has called in his Queer History of a Word, an injury history, into something that promises to be a productive and galvanizing force for the politic of modern embodiment. Thanks.
Is this on? Hi. Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Mariam Naziripour, and I'm here today to talk to you about makeup after the internet. And oh, sorry guys. I'm here today to talk to you about makeup after the internet. And to understand makeup after the internet, we have to start by understanding. Sorry, I have to pull this up. Sorry. To understand makeup after the internet, we have to start by talking about makeup beforehand. For much of history, early history, makeup was worn by both men and women, and it was a commonly accepted thing. However, throughout Western history, makeup has been treated as a female frivolity. Long condemned for its inherent untrustworthiness, moralists of both genders long classified makeup as a tool of the devil or worse, prostitutes. Even today, men and women who take their appearance into their own hands are shamed for doing so. To wear a full face of makeup, people often speculate you must be insecure, looking for a man, or both. YouTube comedian Jenna Marbles perfectly summarizes this archaic connotation in her first viral video, How to Trick People into Thinking You're Good Looking. While reenacting her beautification process in satirical shorthand, she alternates between calling herself ugly and calling herself a whore. The goal is to make yourself look nothing like yourself, she says, while disparaging her makeup application. Natural isn't good enough, and fake is for sluts. No one really considers makeup art because makeup is still treated as a lie. The unconscious assumption is that women must be naturally beautiful objects if they are considered beautiful at all. Makeup and beauty are still treated as an obligation packaged with femaleness. While what is beauty is a question with about as many answers as what is art, in contemporary society we have a pretty close definition. Beauty is what looks good on the camera. While men can look all kinds of ways on the camera, including ugly, women on camera look remarkably the same and are almost always attractive. And we assume that they are naturally so. Natural couldn't be further from the truth. Post 1080p, fake is necessary. She isn't born with it. It's Maybelline, MAC, Makeup Forever, made to look effortless. Our current unfair approach to beauty forgets that the current standard doesn't allow for natural. In an image-driven society where beauty is pursued in the name of influence, tricking men is beside the point. It's tricking the camera that counts. Post-digital makeup is the latest era in a medium that has existed throughout history. Our relationship with digital devices has changed our definition of beauty and the makeup as a medium with it. This is not unusual, as cosmetics and technology have always been intrinsically linked. Available tools have always dictated what we put on our face and how. The post-digital shift in makeup aesthetics mirrors the makeup boom of the early 20th century. After the Industrial Revolution, advances in manufacturing, product chemistry, packaging, and distribution of goods and information led to an unprecedented boom in the market. In 1849, the US Census counted 39 cosmetic companies. By the end of the century, there were 262. Catalogs made this influx of innovative products like the lipstick tube accessible by bringing them directly to women's stores. The growing women's magazine industry, starting with Vogue in 1892, brought advertisements to inspire aspirational envy. Makeup knowledge was limited to sponsored bits of advice in these periodicals and self-help books with titles like Beauty and How to Keep It or The Perfection of Womanhood. Makeup became more accessible and affordable than ever before in this time. Today, manufacturing is mostly automated. Cosmetic chemistry is so precise that it defies casual understanding, and advertising is an unquestioned institution of makeup. While innovations in chemistry and manufacturing made the greatest impact to the makeup of the earliest 20th century, today the spread of information has transformed the medium. The Sears Roebuck catalog, women in pink Cadillacs, and department stores are long dead primary distribution methods. The internet facilitates access to millions of products, from e-commerce sites like Sephora.com to an exponentially growing market of indie makeup brands. View culture has given rise to a vibrant community of bloggers and forums like Makeup Alley. These online communities have created the richest archive of makeup to ever exist. The internet puts documentation in control of the makeup wearer or artist, preserving not only the final product, but the process behind it. Blogs, tutorials, and social media detail the techniques used to achieve any look, which is totally unlike our records of makeup of the past, which were limited to the poets and essayists shaming or praising women of the time, or the paintings that chose to depict makeup fashions, and most, for whatever reason, didn't. None of this would be possible, none of this documentation would be possible without another emerging technology of the early 20th century, the camera. Our records, there are entire makeup trends, like the elaborate black plaster patches in the 17th and 18th centuries that are relatively undepicted by painting. For makeup wearers of the past, you couldn't trust another artist to document the art on your face, or let alone the process behind it. Makeup was a purely ephemeral art form because documentation was subject to the limitations of visual representation. Drawing, painting, and sculpture all have their disadvantages when it comes to capturing the face. Photography captured an unbiased reality, and as a result, we started to see faces differently. This is evidenced by painters who use photography as a part of their practice, like the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Influenced by their own photographic experiments and by the work of contemporary Julia Margaret Cameron, the Pre-Raphaelites painted faces, specifically female faces, in a style seldom seen before painting. The women of their work embody the properties of the photographed face, seen in the sharp, dark jawlines and the deep shadows beneath the cheeks and flanking the bridge of the nose. Victorian critics often referred to the female subjects of these paintings as ugly. This is because traditionally women in painting were depicted with full, soft faces and often double chins, and this was what was considered beautiful up until photography, really. The automated perspective of photography gave permanence to the fleeting shadows gracing the face that were not always apparent to the naked eye alone. After the 20th century, photographic images became the default mode of documentation. As this happened, we embraced the aesthetic of the Pre-Raphaelites, and female beauty came to be defined as what looks good on camera. While still images alluded to the face as a three-dimensional object, moving images showed our faces as they truly are, in the round. To satisfy this technical shift, the faces picked to be on film had to be exaggerated and expressive. Makeup, long used in theater to exaggerate actors' faces for those far away, was used in a similar fashion for film. Lipsticks and drawn-on brows highlighted already expressive features, while heavy-handed blush enhanced the features as well. While the function was similar, products used for theater wouldn't do. Early Hollywood artist Max Factor developed a grease paint for film in 1914 because grease paint looked, and I quote, grease paint for stage looked, and I quote, terrifying on camera. Similar conditions pushed Max Factor to release Pancake in 1935 to satisfy the demands of Technicolor film. Makeup continued to highlight the already photogenic faces of Hollywood starlets. The women on film during this time were beautiful according to the camera. These naturally photogenic faces had sharp definition with perfectly symmetrical features and subtle shadows on the cheeks and chasing the jawline. The ideally photogenic starlets from Hollywood's golden age became the template for female beauty and, as a result, makeup. This template changed as technology progressed. Color images popularized platinum blondes with light eyes and red lips. Tans and heavy eye makeup, once considered ugly, became essential for women, and in the case of tans, men on camera. Digital photography exacerbated the demands of analog photography. The higher resolution and even greater depth of field pushed the photogenic template to new extremes. In the 90s, models and actresses alike starved themselves not only to fit into impossible sizes, but to cultivate deep ditches beneath their cheekbones. The unreal proportions of contemporary action babes with their sharp cheekbones and intense hooded eyes reflect our presence for the artificially natural. Even though these stars are often undermade up, high-definition cameras made to look undermade up, made to look natural. High-definition cameras capture every single flaw. Now, even women once considered beautiful use makeup to trick the camera into thinking they're good-looking. One of the biggest parts of post-digital makeup is contouring. For those who don't have these shadows on their face, contouring is used to allude to them, or if you do, to highlight them. Contouring originated in the 30s, but our contemporary techniques of contouring come from drag contouring techniques developed in the 60s and the 70s. As the techniques gradually infiltrated larger makeup culture, and advances in chronic chemistry and widespread access to techniques made contouring a highly advanced art, when expertly executed, contouring can now transform the face into a totally different face. Even though few women find themselves in front of HD cameras, that has not stopped contouring from becoming pervasive, nor has it stopped any of the other high-definition trends from catching on. This can be attributed in part to advertising, which is as linked to makeup as technology. The faces of women who appear on screen have been used to market products since the days of Max Factor's Pancake. Flawless, often retouched images of these women are used as aspirational images for the public. Makeup after film is designed to be seen and preserved, even if no one is preserving it. But now, you'd be hard-pressed to find a makeup wearer who isn't preserving their appearance. Photography was once reserved for special occasions, but we are now photographed constantly by others and ourselves. Cell phone cameras made the camera's gaze inescapable, and now it is a feat to not know what you look like on camera. Widespread access to photography has made people conscious of their appearance on camera and prompted many to alter themselves. This is done not only by makeup, but filters and photo editing apps, which have made retouching simple and accessible as makeup. The template of the beautiful female face is so pervasive that it's transcended the photographic documentation and made its way into other modes of artistic representation. Paintings, illustrations, and cartoons are mediums where the template has become the default. Female computer-generated images almost always recall the photogenic template. Okay, well, if you know what Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite looks like, that's what's supposed to be up there. She looks remarkably like Laura Croft, though. Computer-generated images, mathematically perfect, are an uncanny vision of what we find attractive. But unlike Faces, computer-generated images, are sculpted from blank space. And that is where we end up. Even though throughout history, the verb for applying makeup was to paint, post-digital makeup is not painting, even though the products are painted on the face. It is a sculpture where the surface is manipulated with light and color. Unlike rendered faces, we create new faces of makeup out of bone and flesh, which cannot be moved without a knife, but can be manipulated with artifice. The best makeup defies the template and exaggerates the natural contours on the face, embracing the unique bone structure of the individual. Jenna Marbles would know. Now the most subscribed woman on YouTube, her makeup is drastically different from her early videos. She isn't wearing less, she's wearing it better. By refining her technique, the products work with her face rather than against it. The goal is to make yourself look nothing like yourself, Marble says in her first video, while looking like a somewhat deliberate caricature of the photogenic face. Striving for a near-perfect replica of the template will almost always almost end up like the uncomfortable mask of a AAA video game heroine. Not everyone has the bone structure of Lana Turner or Liz Taylor. The goal is to highlight your unique bones and features, to make yourself a better version of yourself, to trick the unforgiving digital gaze into seeing you the way you see yourself or into the way you feel like being seen. Makeup has always been a trick, but what good art in some way isn't? Makeup practitioners don't owe anyone the truth. We're not tricking anyone but the lens.
There's audio, yeah. Is it not going to work? Figure it out. I don't know what to hook this up to. So if we can try put that going there. Yeah. We can just play the sound through the speakers on here, and I can put the microphone to it.
Sorry about that, Emily.
That's all right. I mean, that'll work. That'll work. So I mean, it's probably easier if I just
go ahead and start.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I can just do it up to the laptop. I can crank up the volume on this. So I'm cranking up the volume on my laptop, so when it plays, I can just. Is that all right? Okay. Okay. Is this on? It's on. Okay. Hi. I'm going to be talking about virtual agents today and how they enforce gender stereotypes. Okay, so when you think about a robot, and you think about a female robot, what kind of things do you think about? Generally, we have like a lot of stereotypes of fembots and cyborgs and seductive killers and overly sexualized stereotypes. But the virtual agent is something that we see kind of more often in everyday life, and she has more ubiquitous gender stereotypes that are kind of more pernicious. This is kind of what you get when you see a Google search of virtual agents. So as you can see, these are all white, young, female, servile, middle class. They're all kind of groomed to a business casual sort of set of dress. Most of them are wearing like collared shirts, polo shirts, that kind of thing. And they're all just very much the same. Sometimes you do get some male virtual agents here. This is Nathan. This is a support bot for Norton. But he's there to be he sort of offers like higher level tech support. So usually you'll get like a woman for most of the other lower level service jobs. Okay, so, oops, sorry. There's a site called chatbots.org that chronicles like chatbots and virtual agents from all over the world. And most of the ones that are from the English language are female. So where does this come from? Where does this stereotype come from? Why are they always obsequious, servile, attractive, somewhat ambiguously sexually available? A lot of them have like a little bit of cleavage or some, flowing hair. They're kind of attractive. Well, this is kind of where the stereotype starts. This is the 1960s sitcom I Dream of Jeannie. Okay, so here we have Jeannie, an ageless, conventionally beautiful woman. She has unbounded magical powers. She can only act in response to the command of her master. When she appears as mist conjured from a bottle when she's summoned, and she can be sent back to her bottle when she's not needed, so like turning an agent on and off. She can blink to make things happen. There's a sound effect when she casts a spell and something happens. And she worships her master and gets jealous when his attention turns elsewhere. This is a kind of stereotype that has been used for virtual agents for a very long time. In 1977, the first ATM network that was nationwide was opened by Fifth Third Bank, and they named it Jeannie with one N. You can kind of see her little picture up there. And that single N might have been to avoid trademark infringement. But the avatar does look a lot like kind of Barbara Eden because she's got the sort of veil, the flowers around her. And she's a magical being inside the hole in the wall, so she'll respond to a user's demands and conjure cash-like magic. Jeannie's banter and blinking noise when she carries out a task is similar to the thinking noises made by virtual assistants Siri and Cortana and other voice-controlled virtual assistants when they're retrieving answers and they have kind of a waiting sound. So here's an example of that.
Do you love me?
Sorry.
I'm really not ready for love. I'm still working my way through serenity and apprehension.
Okay, in that video, there was a little sound. The guy asked the virtual assistants, all of them, if they loved him. And there was a little thinking noise before they came up with their canned responses. So there's a little bit of banter there. And there's also that little thinking noise. But asking Siri, Cortana, and the like variations of Do You Love Me happens in several of the review videos of these assistants on YouTube. Even if you go to the mainstream tech media sites, you'll see a lot of that kind of question. It's a trope that led to an entire episode of The Big Bang Theory that focuses on Raj falling in love with Siri. Go back here. Okay. He sets the software to address him as sexy, and what ended up killing the romance is that he finally imagined her as a living woman who's even more deferential and available, but once she appears in human form, he's no longer able to speak to command her. Once he loses the ability to command her, she loses her appeal. A lot of virtual agents have an avatar that follows this model. So here's a version of Guile 3D Studios' Denise. And this is Denise right here. This is a guy who's explaining how he's hooked up Denise to his Xbox and Nest. He has Google Nest in his house. And he's asking her to fix his thermostat.
Turn the temperature up. Turn the temperature down.
Can you all hear this?
Go to sleep.
Entering sleep mode. Say wake up to start recognition. I can hear you.
Yeah. There you have it.
Yeah, there you have it. So, I mean, it's kind of like really unnecessary because why do you need to have Denise turning your thermostat on when you can easily do that yourself? Why do you need to have a middleman? There's another clip of Denise that's probably even more telling about what's really going on here.
Moving along, I'm a writer. I've also had Denise integrated to help me with my writing. Wake up.
I can hear you.
I feel like writing.
Okay, let your creativity flow.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, there's really no need for Denise to be presented as human at all, let alone cast in this particular servile version of femininity. Why these agents need to be feminized? I don't know. Why do they need to have gender at all? While they might not have been known for their helpfulness, and their AI skills have long since been surpassed, Microsoft Office assistants that were introduced in 1996 with Windows 97 were mostly neuter. They were either animals or robots or smileys or some kind of cartoons, or they were male caricatures, like they had a genius that was based on Albert Einstein, or Will, who is a figure based on William Shakespeare. The default was Clip-It or Clippy. That's a surreal paperclip character up at the top there. And Clip-It would twist into shapes, including a paper airplane, when people would try to animate it. And the Mac versions featured an animated computer called Mac. And these are some of the assistants here. So Microsoft didn't produce very many overly gendered feminine assistants to the English-speaking market until the appearance of Courtney. Courtney's the one with the car and the flower up there. And she appeared in 2001. She's probably based on there were Carrie Donovan adverts for Old Navy on U.S. television around the same time, the fashion editor with the big glasses. But I mean, she's kind of quirky. She's got a headscarf. She's a bit off from the usual corporate officer template. And she's allowed a little bit of deviation from that corporate mold. The avatar down in the bottom, the assistant there, that's Seiko Sensi. She was a Japanese version of the office assistant, and she appeared in Japan. And she looks very similar to a lot of the virtual assistants that we see now, the way she's dressed, the way she's sitting behind a desk. What's interesting is the genie that also appeared as an office assistant, probably more modeled on the genie in the Disney film Aladdin. I don't know how that got by copyright patrol, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of doing the same function as, I Dream of Genie in that mold, but it is male. So that's kind of an interesting take on how these things work. Here's another version of a representation of an avatar that helps people on the internet. This is from a campaign for AOL that ran in the UK from 1998 to 2003. This is Connie. She's the avatar of the AOL platform, and she guides new users onto the internet. So she appears as a person to help people. She comes and touches them and everything, and tells them everything is going to be all right with the internet. Here she's appearing in a young boy's bedroom and coming to help him get onto AOL, and you can see her pixelating to appear and disappear into the computer when her task is done. Okay. So now, what does all this have to do with people and gender roles? Well, what all these avatars are doing, all these virtual agents, they're performing emotional labor. And if we're using Arlie Russell Hochschild's framework of emotional labor as it relates to deference and gender performance from her classic 1983 study, The Managed Hard Commercialization of Human Feeling, emotional or affective labor requires one to induce or suppress feeling in order to sustain the outward countenance that produces the proper state of mind in others. And yes, men do and can carry out emotional labor, but it's often more demanded in female-dominated service professions and is associated with feminine work. What the virtual agents do, their work is seen as not gender performance work because they simulate, they don't perform. There is no affective labor in what they do because there is nothing to oppress. It's all coded in. Because there is no conflict for the virtual agent when they're performing this deferential femininity, the increasing presence of explicitly gendered virtual agents, it reinforces the idea that these emotional displays are not alienated performative labor, but they're kind of traditional and even natural because the bots appear to be modeled on actual women. So if you are a woman, you're performing this stuff, it's a lot more draining than it is for a bot because the bot doesn't have anything to be drained. One strategy for psychic resistance against the demands of emotional labor that Hochschild identifies is for workers to go into robot. So workers who refuse to perform emotional labor, they withhold deep acting and retreat to surface acting. They just go through the motions of trying to comfort, trying to appease, trying to cajole, all of those things. They pretend to be showing feeling. But virtual agents, they don't need to pretend because they're all surface. They don't manage, they just simulate. Customer service chatbots on the IKEA website, IBM's Amelia, the AI agent that can read and understand text, follow processes, solve problems, and learn from experience. I mean, again, this is another simulation. Machine learning based on aggregate data that's gathered from human experience is what's guiding that learning. All of these agents are increasingly replacing human workers in low-level jobs, especially service-oriented jobs that require exhausting performances of chipper, smiling deference, and are generally performed by women. And meanwhile, the rise in affective computing research at Rosalind Picard's Affective Computing Group at the MIT Media Lab, they've developed a lot of sensor technologies that can monitor sweat and heart rate, facial response, and vocal patterns of people who are performing service jobs. Some of the group's projects include tracking mobile biometric data to monitor sleep and stress in working populations. And they've also created models to predict which calls that come into a call center will lead to more stress on the call center representatives. And then this project is kind of one of the more sinister ones that they have. This is something called Smile Tracker. And what this is, it's a set of tools. It's a camera that's linked to, it's like your webcam. And what it does is it sort of like tracks you all during the day, and every time it sees you having a smile, it takes a picture, and it takes a picture of whatever it is that you're looking at so that you can review these at the end of the day, and you're supposed to be positively motivated by seeing your smiles. And then you're supposed to share them with everybody on social networks. So it's kind of another form of monitoring and policing smiling and always being kind of on. Even if you're the consumer, you're still supposed to be performing this effective labor. But what's really interesting here is that if you see up at the top, it says, having a bad hair day hides smiles. So we've got another set of monitoring and enforcing kind of this performance of looking good and always being aware of how you are performing effective labor. So all this stuff that's coming out of the Media Lab, it has sensor data that demonstrates that effective labor does require effort and monitoring. And virtual agents visibly perform all of these same things without anger, stress, or a bad hair day. And again, machine learning based on data from users' affective cues, like here in the Smile Tracker, can be used to improve what virtual agents do. Because if you're using Smile Tracker and you're smiling at an interaction with a virtual agent, that would be tracked, and you could use this to monitor and improve their performance. So this stands in for greater ability to self-regulate effective performance. The virtual agents don't have to do that. They can just use machine learning from what happens with actual humans. Finally, we have some things from Nuance, and this is the software company that's responsible for the speech technology behind Dragonsoft and Apple's Siri. They also provide virtual agent software. But what's interesting with what they do is they advertise it, but they use human actors to represent the virtual agents. And this is kind of interesting because it sort of suggests what the virtual agent really has to say about what human emotional labor is really about. So the sales text for the Nina virtual agent says, Nina Webb is the ideal brand ambassador. Nina never sleeps, never slips, and always stays on brand. And without bodies, the virtual agents, they don't age, they don't tire, they don't have to deal with the internal conflicts of performing. Okay, I'm almost done. They don't have to worry about having children, bodily functions, anything like that. And like Jeannie and her successors, they also sleep or evaporate when they're no longer needed, and they create greater competition, more punishing standards for people, especially women who are engaged in service work, while further concealing the toll this work takes. And just to show you, this is Nina. I'll show you just a second one. She's helping Carl prepare for his flight.
Nina?
Yes, Carl?
Wish I didn't have to fly.
You'll be fine.
6 hours of pure bliss, no food, no sleep. Probably won't even feed us peanuts.
More like 6 hours of movies. I can pre-order you a great pasta meal, and they have complimentary drinks. That should take the edge off.
I think I packed too much.
You're about 23 kilos. That's 50 pounds. I think you're good. Plus, I booked you an aisle seat with extra legroom, and they have your favorite movie playing.
I love Kung Fu.
And of course, I'll be right there with you. Wouldn't it it be nice if we all had personal assistants like Nina? Now you can with Nina Web, an intelligent virtual assistant that delivers a personalized and effortless experience on your website.
Okay, so finally, just to wrap up, I'd love to know what that book is that Nina's reading while Carl packs. Because, why is it there? There's no indication that the book that she's reading has anything to do with the tasks that she's helping him with. The title's hidden, and while she reads, her focus is off him. So the ideal virtual agent is all deference, all surface, but what they don't offer is interiority or the manager of Hawkshield's managed heart. And if going robot is a form of protest against dehumanizing emotional labor, the human Nina here is offering some unquantifiable spirit for sale, and perhaps that's the one thing the virtual agent can't deliver. Thank you.
Everyone can clap now. Sorry. Sorry about that. Thank you. Like a couple of minutes for one question. Let's check and see if there's anything.
A few technical things from Twitter, nothing too crazy, just a lot of people agreeing, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of good stuff. If there's any specific questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Anyone?
This is sort of for everyone, but a lot of what you guys talked about is how technology is sort of bringing this hairway tension to bear now with these tools that we can sort of alter our identities or change the way we're perceived, et cetera. And I'm just curious sort of what you guys see as sort of the next frontier in that. It seems like this idea has been around for a few decades, and now we're seeing happen in fun ways and whimsical ways and exciting ways. But I'm just curious sort of what your thoughts are about, I don't know, what we should do with them now, where tools should go, like what would be the ideal next tool or way to kind of implement more of this change.
Good question.
Well, as far as makeup goes, there are a few I can't remember the exact artist, but the CD Dazzle project that we were talking about, which is makeup design to trick facial algorithms into not recognizing your face. So I feel like for makeup, things will are going to start becoming more and more avant-garde or more reflective of our changing social climate.
I guess on my side, when it comes to artists making use of these platforms, I think that the goal is that artists are great and amazing because they're able to experiment and kind of exist in territories that challenge ethics and politics and identity in ways that reflect society. So I think that the next frontier in answer your question, I imagine it to be making wider visibility of different types of bodies, and that in itself being political action.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. That's exactly what I was thinking, especially now with the online spaces being able to organize and collect, different bodies, different people's ideas from all over the place, being able to put those together and account for not just one group's needs, but everyone's in a way that's productive. I think now, we have the web, so we have the power to do that, to hopefully encourage action that happens offline as well. So
I'd love to see new technologies allow everybody to express their body and personal experience in every possible way. What I'm a bit hesitant about is that once technologies are created, they're often created with implicit biases by designers and kind of programmatic ways of being expressing identity. So I think anything in the future that would be more regulatory about different kinds of bodies or identities genders, it needs to include a way for people to be able to critique the entirety of the systems that allow them to represent themselves. That needs to be kind of added into the corporate bodies of design and the kind of platforms that we can make on. Because as long as that's in the hand of capitalism, starts getting kind of detailed, we always have to be really aware enough to challenge that.
Thanks, everyone. I think we have to take a break now for the next session. Is that soon? So thank you so much for joining us.